Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome here in the Balie. I'm starting in English, of course, because our most important guest of tonight is John Green. And, well, he's been for a long time in the Netherlands, but his Dutch is quite good, but still, we will give him a little help. I will keep it short. I want to welcome you on behalf of the publisher in the Netherlands, Lemniscaat. And we got a wonderful interviewer tonight, and he will ask all the questions you always wanted to know. And also we got a very special guest tonight, but, well, Edward will introduce her as well. So, Edward from the Vendel, please ask everything you want to know to John Green. Thank you.
John, welcome to you. Welcome to you all. John, do you mind if I do a little introduction in Dutch?
No, please do.
Oké. Welkom aan jullie allemaal. Ik wil eerst even vragen, wij zijn hier natuurlijk voor alle boeken van John, maar toch met name voor het laatste boek. Een weeffout in onze sterren. Maar ik moet eigenlijk even van u weten, wie van u dat nog niet gelezen heeft? Ik niet. Heel goed. Nee, dat is fijn om te weten, want dan weten we of we spoilers kunnen gebruiken, namelijk zinnetjes die iets weggeven van het verhaal, dat houden we dan beperkt. Voor wie John Green nog niet kent, hij is op dit moment en al een tijdje de allerbekendste young adult writer uit Amerika. En is dat eigenlijk ook in Nederland. En hij heeft 6 boeken geschreven, eigenlijk 5,5. Een van die boeken heeft hij samen met iemand anders geschreven. Hij is bekend van zijn eerste boek, Het Grote Misschien heet dat in het Nederlands. Looking for Alaska in het Engels. En schreef daarna onder andere 19 keer Catharina, An Abundance of Catherines. Mooiere titel vind ik eigenlijk in het Engels. Ja, toch? Ja. En Paper Towns was de volgende. En dan was er nog een boek wat hij samen met iemand anders heeft geschreven. Will Grayson met David Levitt. En het laatste boek, dat zijn er dus eigenlijk 5 en 6 wat ik zei. Een weeffout in onze sterren. En in het Engels heet dat The Fault in Our Stars. Dat is nog niet zo lang geleden hier uitgekomen. En het staat in Amerika al voor de 10e week in de top 10, de New York Times bestsellerlist, hoog. En heeft heel wat weken op 1 gestaan. Wij hopen dat dat natuurlijk hier ook gaat gebeuren. Heeft ongelooflijk goede kritieken gekregen. Echt niet zo'n beetje goed, maar ongelooflijk goed. Niet alleen in Amerika, maar ook in de landen, een paar landen waar het al uit is, ook bij ons. En we gaan er vanavond over praten. De indeling van de avond is zo dat we eerst 20 minuten gesprek hebben. Dan hebben we iemand die wat extra's gaat vertellen, dat horen we zo meteen. En op het eind is er nog gelegenheid om nog een beetje meer te praten en ook voor jullie, als jullie vragen willen stellen. Ja? Oké.
Okay.
I didn't say anything bad.
I can follow along close enough.
I just said you. Excuse me. I just told them you wrote 6 books. But that's for all the books that you threw away.
Yeah. I have read the 6 books. You haven't read them.
Maybe even more. Okay, so we're going to talk mainly about The Fault in Our Stars, of course. And maybe we should just have the content of the book, well, the starting point at least, in a few sentences.
Yeah, it's a novel about a young woman with stage 4 thyroid cancer named Hazel, whose mother thinks that she's depressed, so her mom makes her go to this support group for kids with cancer. And at this support group she meets a young man named Augustus Waters, with whom she pretty much instantly falls in love, and it's sort of their story, their love story. But she has a second love, which is a love for this novel called An Imperial Affliction, written by an American novelist of Dutch descent called Peter van Houten, who is now living in exile in Amsterdam. And her greatest, this book sort of ends mid-sentence, and her greatest wish is to meet the author and find out what happens after the end of the book.
Yeah, so that's the premise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you first a bit about the genesis of the book. How did it start?
Well, I mean, in some ways it started almost like just over 10 years ago. I worked at a children's hospital as a chaplain for about 5 months. And during that time working at the children's hospital, I really wanted to write about sick kids and what I saw of illness, I guess, which was very different from what I was reading about when I was reading about sick kids. And so that was part of it. But for many years the book never made any progress, and I would work and work and work and nothing would ever get done. And it was miserable. And it was the book I kept trying to write when I would end up writing my other books. But then I started, I think it was when two things happened. I became a father, and I became good friends with a young woman who later died of cancer. And in that process, I was able to focus the book and kind of write the story that I had been trying to write all that time.
And how was the writing process? Was it, sometimes some books go fast, they almost write themselves. Did it happen to this one?
No. That sounds nice though. No, it was really slow. It was fast when there were periods of fast, which are exhilarating. We talked earlier about the best feelings in writing are the feelings when you aren't, you're somehow, yourself is annihilated and you don't feel like you're yourself, you feel like you're no one, you're removed from the universe. And there were moments like that when I was writing The Fault in Our Stars, but it was really difficult. It was really emotionally challenging. It was really sad for me, and I think it was very personal for me, and so that was a challenge, and it was pretty slow. But those electric moments come just often enough to keep you going, you know, to fight for the next one. So it's like an addiction where, you know, makes your life terrible in so many ways, but there's this moment of exhilaration that you're waiting for that comes, and you feel that it's all been worth it.
But you just said there was a lot of sadness. How do you write when being sad?
I don't know. I mean, I would go into a coffee shop every morning. Like, there was about a 3-month period where I would go into a Starbucks at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and I would just sit down and I would open my computer and I would start crying, and I would close the computer like 4 hours later, and I would get up and I would walk out. And I'm sure that people who worked there just thought I was crazy. You know? I mean, just like, what is that guy looking at all day that's making him so incredibly sad? I would work over in a corner, but I couldn't. I usually write in my basement, but I couldn't work on it there. I was so paralyzed by it that I couldn't work in there. I needed to be around some people. I needed to feel some kind of. I wanted to write this really hopeful, funny book, but I was sad about it. You know, like, I wanted to make it really funny and really hopeful and thoughtful, but I felt very sad about it. So that was how I did it. You know, sadness can be quite paralyzing, but it can also be motivating.
But is it true that you were literally crying? I mean, what?
Yeah, literally crying the whole time.
So there was a lot of water.
Yeah,
the whole was
like sometimes like crying like with my like shoulders even. Like,
yeah.
It was obvious that I was crying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what to say about it. It was very strange. I mean, and you know, that happened too when I was living here. I lived here for 2 months while I was working on the book, and much of that time was very difficult too, and I felt very sad and frustrated. A lot of it was not about like I feel so sad for the characters. A lot of it was my sense of frustration that I kept feeling like I wasn't doing the story justice, and like I wasn't writing the story as well as I could write it. And much more than any of my other novels, this novel felt like it was a gift that was given to me by these people who I'd known and cared about, and in many cases had died. And so I felt this responsibility to them. And it's a terrible thing to do to yourself, to tell yourself that you are responsible in some way for honoring these dead people. That's too much pressure for any writer, let alone, you know, a writer of my meager abilities. So eventually I think I had to let that go. And I had to say, you know, that's not my job. My job is to write this novel, and it needs to be a novel. And that's actually when I wrote the foreword in the book, where I talk about, I was mostly writing that to myself.
Because the content of the short foreword is, please don't take this as a story about real people.
Yeah. I think I was writing that to myself. I think I was telling myself, you don't have to write a book about real people, or even that honors real people. You know, made-up stories matter.
Yeah.
They are part of how we construct meaning to human consciousness. It's an okay thing. It's valuable in and of itself.
So, what was the difficulty then to have it, because you wanted to write a hopeful book? I think it is absolutely a hopeful book. Was it difficult to make it hopeful, or what exactly was the big difficulty?
I think that was the big difficulty.
Yeah.
So there are kind of two easy ways to be hopeful, or two easy ways to respond to the world as we find it. The first way is not to notice it, not to pay attention to it, and then it's quite easy to feel hopeful if you don't pay attention to the reality of the situation in which we find ourselves. And the other way is to respond to it very nihilistically. So you look at a world where it's not just like the contemporary world where children die or where there is this radical injustice from the very first moment of human history until now. This injustice has always been with us. Children have always died. I remember when I worked at the Children's Hospital, one of the very first things that my supervisor said to me was, "It is natural for children to die." And I reacted to that so viscerally, and I thought that was such a disgusting thing for her to say, and such an awful thing for her to say. And for years, I mean, it's stuck in my head as just one of the worst things I ever heard someone say out loud. But this is a woman who had been working in that children's hospital for 25 years and had seen thousands of children die. And biologically, she's right. Like, it is natural. It has always been part of our species. So if you look at that, it's very easy to respond to that nihilistically, which is the other way to respond, to say, yes, it's true. The world is depraved of meaning, and the universe is cold and capricious and cares nothing for us, and nothing means anything. And I think on some level that's how I responded for many years after all that. I either looked away from it, or when I did look at it, I said, no meaning can be made of this. This is worthless, it's useless. The whole affair of humanness is useless. And I think slowly, in writing, it wasn't, I really had to write the book to make it hopeful. And I think it was that was a struggle of years.
And earlier you said that when you finished it, you actually didn't have any good idea about what you did.
Yeah.
It was there, you were not sure. The end was written in Amsterdam, actually.
Yeah, I'd written many ends, but the actual end that ended up in the book was written here. And much of the last half of the book was written here. And I turned it in to my editor, like I left, the day before I left, I emailed it to my editor in the US, and then we flew home. And when I emailed it to her, my email was basically like, I'm sorry, this is what I did while I was in Amsterdam, I'm sorry that I screwed it up. Here it is. And then I got home and she said, this is quite good, I'm very pleased with it, I think we should publish it quite soon. So, yeah, I was genuinely pretty negative about it. But then, once I got home, this was partly because I needed to have my gallbladder removed. That's part of why I was so unhappy, it turns out. And so once I got home and I had the surgery, I suddenly felt much better, not just about my book, but also, about the world. And then rereading the book, I saw the work that I'd done in Amsterdam, and I understood that it was helpful for the book.
Mm. Amsterdam is also a part of the book, not only because the main characters come back to Amsterdam, they come to Amsterdam to, I think I can say that, to visit the writer that she adores.
Yeah.
But also because you said Amsterdam, and it is true, is a drowning city, and water is something that is all over the book as a metaphor, of course, because her illness, for the ones who don't know, is schildklierkanker met een uitzaaiing naar de longen, so her lungs fill up with water. So it's drowning girl, drowning city. Yeah. You have all kinds of these parallels in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did they come up naturally, or was a lot of it constructed?
A lot of it was natural. The first time that we visited Amsterdam in 2006, when I was thinking a lot about this book, I remember the first time I saw the canals, and it's strange, but it immediately reminded me of when I worked at the hospital, when I would see kids with chest tubes and the water, coming out of their lungs, that drainage system, which is so elegant and beautiful and life-giving. I mean, it's sort of gory to look at, I guess, but it saves kids' lives and it makes their lives possible. It immediately struck me that the canal system was similar in some ways, and so that metaphor came up early on. Not thinking about it as way into literature, but just thinking about Amsterdam. And a lot of it came naturally. I mean, I was conscious of using water in the book and trying to use it in a way that would stand up to critical reading, I guess, but no, I did want it to be pretty natural.
Mm. And also there is a scene in the Anne Frank house, Anne Frank house, and we agreed that we can talk a bit about that scene. It is the scene where the first kiss is being given, or not given especially, but between
shared,
yeah, because it's actually not really one that starts, and so on.
Yeah, I honestly don't remember.
You don't remember?
I don't remember. So.
The girl starts.
Okay. I haven't read it in a while.
It's a good book.
Thank you. I'll never read it again, but I'm glad it's good.
Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to ask you some. Well, first of all, they kiss in the Anne Frank house, and in the back they hear the voice of Otto Frank, the father of Anne Frank, because it's on a tape, I think, or something.
Mm-hmm. They play the speech that he plays this. He gives this 1 minute 30-second speech, and they play it on a loop all day in the last room of the house.
Yeah. And you get this question a lot, but I'll pose it anyway. Why there?
I usually dismiss the question, so I'll try to answer it this time. I usually dismiss it by just saying that it seemed like a really romantic place when I was visiting it. But that's not the truth, obviously. It's not a romantic place, at least not in that sense. I wanted to reclaim the place in some way. Anne Frank, after all, made out in the Anne Frank house. I will remind you, she made out with a boy there, and that was part of it. And part of it was that I wanted these kids to be moved by the experience into being okay with hurting each other. Because I mean, a big part of what is stopping Hazel from wanting to be with Augustus is what she feels is the certainty of her hurting him. The certainty that any physical relationship or any romantic relationship will only be a sadness in his life when she dies, and that therefore there's no use in it. And I think the house and the difficulty that she has in getting there breaks that down for her. So it's almost a gift that the museum and the Frank family and the Van Pels family has given all of us, hopefully, but certainly these two characters.
Just before the kiss, a moment before, the two, I think it's Gus who says, "Can't we do something to the few Nazi people that are left to fight them?" And then she says, well, she goes along in this fantasy actually, and he wants to be fighting disabled robots or something. And he says, "The tales of our exploits will survive as long as the human voice itself." So he's kind of dreaming this fantasy. But in the beginning of the book, he tells us that his biggest fear is oblivion, being forgotten. And not only water is very important in the book, but time, of course, which is almost the same, metaphorically spoken. And can you tell a little bit about this fear that he has, which is an unusual fear for a boy his age?
Yeah, I think it's less unusual among the sick, maybe, but yeah, it is unusual. He's very afraid that he won't do anything that matters, or that makes an imprint, that makes a lasting imprint, and he's very concerned with trying to do something that will matter in a big way, that will leave an impact, that will make the world remember him. Like later he says, I always thought of myself as the kind of guy who gets obituaries in all the newspapers, and I think he really wants that, and Hazel very early on in the book points out to him that that's absolute folly, because we're all going to die, and not just everyone in the room, but the whole species will die, and no one will remember that anyone ever built this canal system or this city or anything on this planet, and the planet will be annihilated. And so if your goal is to last forever, you're not thinking very hard about the definition of forever, and that's why he says, as long as human voices exist, it's almost like he's acknowledging to her that he remembers her saying that all those pages before, but then she responds with this, even though she doesn't, maybe believe it, she responds with this very gentle and kind thing, which is that she says, and even after that, when the robots recall the human absurdities of sacrifice and compassion, they will remember us. Almost to say, like, it could extend even past that, Gus, like it could be, So I think like that's a moment where they're making little gifts to each other, because he's kind of conceding that his worldview is a little bit silly, and she's kind of conceding that her worldview is a little bit too stringent and strong, and she's kind of softening toward him.
Yeah, to me one of the amazing things of the book is that when you have read it, you learn. We've learned a lot from this girl, actually, and we admire her in her simplicity in some ways, and nature. It all comes naturally to her, these thoughts about infinity and so on. You must have loved this girl.
I did, yeah, very much. Yeah, very, very much. I mean, definitely more than I've ever loved any character I wrote, and I felt like writing from her perspective was a real privilege, and I really, really cared about her.
Mm.
Yeah, and I miss writing about her. I wish I could kind of just have kept writing about her forever.
Yeah.
But then no one else would have ever read it.
No, because just like the writer in the book, you want us to have our own ideas about what happened afterwards and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are so many more questions, but maybe we'll have, about this scene actually, we'll have a bit more later.
Oh, good.
But we're first going to listen to someone special, because apart from these things and the metaphors, there's also something else in this book which has appeared in many of your books, especially in an abundance of Catherine's, maths, wiskunde. And we have our own Wiskundemeisje, math girl. How do I say it? Yeah, math girl? Mathematics girl, yeah. I will do this a bit in Dutch. Zij heet Ionica Smeets. En u kent haar misschien van haar blog wiskundemeisje.nl of van haar 2-wekelijkse column. Jij schrijft 2 wekelijks, toch? Eens in 2 weken? Eens per maand zelfs, ja. In de Volkskrant. Maar ook schrijft ze wel eens aan in De Wereld Draait Door. Ze is wetenschapsjournalist en wiskundige. En zij gaat ons vertellen, ja, nou, we zullen het zien, iets over de wiskunde in de boeken van John Green. Ionica Smeets.
Hi everyone, well, you see I'm not as good with Photoshop as with mathematics, but the fault in our maths. My name is Ionica Smeets, and I owe quite a lot to John, and one of the things I owe to him is that I know that my name is an anagram of I tame cosines, because you are so obsessed with name anagrams. You know, being a mathematician and having this as your name anagram is quite awesome. And I want to talk a bit about a few mathematical things in the work of John Green, and the first thing is Venn diagrams. For those of you who've read The Fault in Our Stars, there's some really cute Venn diagrams in them, and Venn diagrams are, well, really something nice, I think. And this is the really basic one, so you have something with property A, something with property B, and then in the intersection you have both properties. So for instance, you could have things that are red and things that are cats, and then the intersection is cats that are red. And John Venn introduced these Venn diagrams to make logical reasoning easier. I actually looked at the original paper for you because I hoped I would find something interesting, and it was really a very dull paper in 1880. And what I did like about it, he had this entire section about how you could make stamps from Venn diagrams or wooden models, so you wouldn't have to draw them all the time. And I think he cannot have imagined how the internet would go crazy on Venn diagrams over 120 years later. And one nice thing, he didn't call them Venn diagrams, he called them Eulerian or Eulerian circles, and I never know how to pronounce this. And I think this is good advice in general. If you want to have something named after you, give it a very hard to pronounce name, and soon everyone will call them Venn Diagrams or something else after you. So I wanted to show you some other Venn diagrams, and this is by far my favorite. You see in the green part cute furry animals who have a guitar. Then in the yellow part cute animals with a beak and the keyboard. And then in the middle you see the platypus with a guitar, which is good. There's a whole group on the internet where they make Venn diagrams of songs, so it's of course the Cure classic Boys Don't Cry in a Venn diagram. And you can also make Venn diagrams of more properties. So this is a new classic one about people with certain properties. And in the purple it's people who are intelligent and socially awkward. They're called dweebs. Then the green ones are the intelligent, obsessed ones. Those are the geeks. Then you also have the dorks, who are obsessed and socially awkward. And then in the middle, if you're all three of them, you're a nerd. And this diagram has been going around on the internet for quite a while, and it led to XKCD, a famous webcomic, to draw this one. People with strong opinions about the difference between geeks and nerds. Well, they're both. So I thought I should draw my own Venn diagram of some books. So I have here in blue the books with Venn diagrams, in red the books that made me cry, and the intersection is a large number of books I had to read during my PhD. Then in yellow there's books I want to give to friends, and there are actually some books with Venn diagrams I like to give to friends, more the popular mad stuff, Simon Singh and so. Then there are books that made me cry and I want to give to friends, like The Book Thief, or, well, many other books. In fact, I cry quite easily. And of course, here in the black, I think there can only be one book, and we all know which one it is, that has Venn diagrams, made me cry, and I want to give to friends. Actually, I've given it to quite a lot of friends. There you go, of course, The Fault in Our Stars. And there's the other thing about mathematics in this book is, of course, the infinities. And a central statement is that some infinities are bigger than other infinities. And Hazel starts thinking about this, and at some point she mentions that the infinity between 0 and 1 must be smaller than the infinity between 0 and 2. And mathematicians all know that this is wrong. And usually when I read something that is wrong in a book about mathematics, which is usually when there's something about mathematics in a book, I get really, really upset with the writer. And I was like, oh, he's such an idiot, why didn't he check this? And the strange thing is, I didn't get upset when I read this. I read it and was like, yeah, it's wrong, but then again, you know, it's this teenage girl, what does she know? And it's okay, I liked her reasoning. And then later I read that you did this all on purpose, so it's good that I didn't get mad, and maybe you want to say something about it. But I thought it would be nice, because I'm here now, to talk something about infinities and to really show that some infinities are bigger than others. And mathematicians like to say that a talk without a proof is like a romantic comedy without a kiss, so let's do a proof later on. And a classic story mathematicians use to talk about infinity is Hilbert's Hotel. Does anyone know it? No, I can make everything up now, so that's good. So there's a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. They're numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, but then there are infinite rooms. And it's fully booked. But they have a very good guy working behind the counter, which is, showing that it's not a hotel in Amsterdam probably, but... And he always wants to help guests, so his hotel with these infinite rooms is fully booked, and then a new traveler arrives. And he's at the desk and he says, oh, I would really like to stay the night, can you help me? And the guy says, well, yeah, of course, it's not so hard, I have infinite rooms, so the person in room number 1 can go to room number 2, the person in room number 2 can go to room number 3, and so on, and then the first room will be empty and everyone will still have a room, which is excellent. Then, a new bus comes from Infinite Travels, and they have a new sort of bus with an infinite number of seats, also numbered. And they want to have these infinite amount of travelers fit into this hotel room. And then the guy behind the desk thinks of something again. He says, well, actually, I can do this. If everyone goes to the double of their room number, so the person in room 1 goes to 2, the person in 2 goes to 4, the person in 3 goes to 6, and then we will have all the odd numbers opened up, and that's an infinite amount of numbers. So everyone will find a room, which shows that so infinite plus infinite, is sort of infinite, which is something I cannot say in a real mathematical content, but here I can. Now the travel agency decides to go a bit more crazy, and now they send an infinite number of buses with an infinite amount of people. And they said, well, can you fit them all in this hotel? And he can again do it. But he has to be a bit smart. So here you see the first people in the first buses, and in all the buses there are infinitely many people. And if you start, so you can do the same thing, ask everyone to move to the double of their room number, you have an infinite amount of rooms free. But then you cannot start unloading the first bus, because then the rest of the people will have to wait infinitely long before their bus is coming. But you can do it with a nice zigzag pattern. So you start with the first person in the first bus, then the second person in the first bus, and then you go to the first person in the second bus, and then you zigzag through all the passengers, and then in the end everyone will have a room again. So, this hotel is seemingly quite excellent. Everyone can always fit in. Actually quite nice is that George Cantor used this zigzag argument to prove that there are just as many fractions as there are numbers. So it's a very serious mathematical argument.
Sorry.
Yeah, he didn't draw the images though, I guess. And then now comes the real serious problem. Now there's a new travel agency, and they don't number their passengers with numbers 1, 2, 3, but with real numbers. And real numbers are every number you can make by putting a 0 and then a dot and then an infinite amount of numbers. We actually make the infinite quite small. We only take the infinite between 0 and 1. So it's a small kind of infinite. So you can imagine that the first 8 passengers would have something like this. So in every room there is someone that has an infinite amount of digits behind his or her name. So the first one is 0.243, etc. And you can imagine that you can make a list of all these numbers. And now you wonder, can you fit every possible number into the hotel? So every number you can think of. So that's only the numbers between 0 and 1. Can you put all these numbers in this infinite Hilbert hotel, which had no trouble fitting infinite buses with infinite people in it? And the surprising thing is you cannot do this. And how Cantor proved this with a diagonal argument. And he said, okay, imagine you have a list that goes on forever and ever with all the numbers between 0 and 1. And then we're going to look at the numbers at the diagonal. So that's what's now going to come at the bottom. So this is the number that is on the diagonal, if you look at it, right? Okay. And he said, now imagine that you make a new number from this number by changing the digit every time into something else. Doesn't matter what, as long as it's not the same. So for instance, you can make this number. So instead of an 8, you do a 9. Instead of a 7, you do a 3. Instead of a 4, you do a 2, and so on. So you have this infinite list with an infinite amount of numbers, and then you take the diagonal of it and you make a new number which differs from the real number that is there. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's not the same as the one in the list. And this number can impossibly be in your list. Do you see why? I know. Because if it was in the first position of the list, the first digit had to be the same as the first digit of that number. So if it was the first one in the list, the first digit had to be the same as the first digit in the list. And if it would be in the second position, the second number would have to be the same as the second in the list, because somewhere on the diagonal you would always have to match a number, and it's impossible. So there are more numbers between 0 and 1 than the numbers you can count. So really some infinities are bigger than others. And it's really, it can be, I think, quite mind-boggling. I know when this was first proven, this was the most exciting moment during the first year of my studies. And half of the people didn't get it at all, so please don't feel upset. If I really wanted to explain it longer, I would need 2 days, I guess. And these infinities are really mind-boggling. So Cantor, who thought of this, ended up in an asylum, and it really said that a lot of people who started really thinking about this went crazy. And one of the big open questions in mathematics is whether there can be another size of infinity. So we have the infinity of the numbers you can count, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And we know that this infinite amount is the same if you take all the fractions or if you take the negative numbers as well. These are all the same infinite. Then we have the other infinity of the real numbers, so all the numbers with all the digits between 0 and 1. And this is the same if you take it from 0 to 1, or 0 to 2, or 0 to 3. It's all the same infinite. And we do not know whether there is maybe a third infinite, or a fourth, or something in between. We have no idea. So that's one of the big open questions. So Edward already asked who read The Fault in Our Stars, who read An Abundance of Quatrains? Quite a few people. So I must say I give a lot of talks about love and mathematics, and I always talk about An Abundance of Quatrains. And usually no one has read it. And I can say all kinds of things about the book, and I read it years ago, so I must have forgotten all kinds of things. I must say that after my talks many people start reading the book, so that's good. But, well, for those of you who don't know the book, I will just spell what you need to know for the mathematics. There's a guy in it, Colin, a former child prodigy, and he has been dumped by a girl named Catherine, not once, but 19 times in a row, as the Dutch title 19 keer Catherine suggests, which is good. It always helps me reminding the number of Catherines. And he makes a road trip, and he wants to think of a formula that will predict how long a relationship will last, and more importantly, who of the two will dump the other. And one of the reasons he's doing this is, well, because he's being dumped all the time and he wants to at least see it coming when it's going to happen. The other thing is he thinks if he can make this formula, he will be so famous and everyone will love him, and then he can get one of the Catherines back. Is that more or less correct? You read it last night, so is it more or less correct?
Yeah, I think he also wants to matter.
Oh yeah, and then he wants to matter, who doesn't? Yeah. And after a lot of tweaking and thinking about mathematics, he comes up with this lovely formula. It's actually the most complicated formula I ever use in my presentations. And there's 5 different parameters in it. A for age, then D for the dump. It's about how often you dump. So it's between 2 partners, and if you have dumped all your previous one, you have a high dump factor, and if you've always been dumped, you have a low dump factor. Then there's the popularity, the personality. It's actually, I think, mostly being extrovert or introvert. And age for hotness, which is also, of course, very important for who's about to be dumped. And usually when I give these talks, I talk a bit about something called the George Clooney equilibrium in game theory, which basically says that the most attractive guy, the one who looks most like George Clooney, will get the most attractive girl. You can see you can always translate mathematics into these very easy things. And so I did this formula for myself and George Clooney. There's a website where you can do this formula. It used to be on your site, but it crashed all the time.
Yeah.
And I programmed it myself, but that also crashed all the time. I'm not so good in programming, but luckily it's online. If you Google pale green things, you can do it for yourself. So I filled it out. I'm 32, George is 50. Doesn't look it though. Popularity, I gave myself a bit above average because, you know, I have this blog, sold some books, but, you know, I'm nothing compared to George Clooney. Attractiveness, I gave myself a 3. I thought, you know, I don't know, but him a 5. Then the dump or dumpy score, so I've dumped quite a few of my ex-boyfriends, but I'm nothing compared to George Clooney, who, you know, pushes aside supermodels and whatsoever. And then the introvert, extrovert, I had to do a bit of a guess here, but I guess, you know, this actor, outspoken, he must be very extrovert. And then I drew the graph. And you see a sort of a smiley, and that means that partner 2 will be the dumper. And it also argues that the steeper the curve, the shorter the relationship will be. So I think this graph tells me that if I ever get to date George Clooney, he will dump me quite soon. But the fun thing about it, so this formula in the book is of course nonsense, and it's nicely explained in an appendix that this is not a real formula, though the modeling is done very nicely. So what I liked a lot when I read it is that Colin tweaks the formula using what he knows. So he makes a formula and then he looks at previous relationships and he thinks, does the formula match the data I have, which is what you do when you're a scientist. But you can actually model relationships with mathematical formulas, and a very easy example mathematicians like to use is Romeo and Juliet. Not a picture from the original Shakespeare one, of course, but from the movie. And the model for Romeo and Juliet, especially at the beginning of the relationship, can be described in two differential equations. And you see for Romeo how he feels about Juliet is denoted by a big R, and then a subscript denotes the time. So how Romeo feels at time t+1 is a negative constant, so a is some positive number with a minus makes it negative, times how Juliet felt before. So he is, if she shows too much love, he draws back, like many men, I'm afraid. And Juliet is a bit more straightforward, so if Romeo shows a lot of love, she will also feel much more in love. So she is a positive constant times how Romeo behaved just before it. So if you take a first year's class in calculus, and who wouldn't, then you find that their behavior in time will be something like this, where blue is the love of Romeo and pink the love of Juliet. And you see that they're hopelessly out of sync, and that only a quarter of the time they are happy in love, and the rest of the time either Romeo is feeling down or Juliet is feeling down. And of course the most depressing thing is that when they're both in love they end it all. So it's not a very good story. And of course this is still not a real realistic relationship, but the John Gottman Institute, here you see John Gottman with his wife. Actually, I recently found out that this is his second wife, and he's a marriage counselor, so I thought it was kind of funny that he tries to hide this. He has an institute where he can predict within 90% whether a couple will stay together or not. And when I first read it, I didn't really believe it. I thought it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So couples would go to him, he would tell them, oh, you're not gonna make it. And the next big fight, they will be like, oh, John Gottman is right, we should split up. But then I found out he made this model by using old relationships. So he had interviewed a lot of people. And then for something else, he is a psychologist. And then he made this model, tried it on their data, and then called them 10 years later to see if they were still together. And then he got this 90%, so that's quite impressive. And he does all of this by this lovely formula. You see it's very similar to the Romeo and Juliet one. It's how the wife behaves, so that's the W at time t+1. And the first thing is there's some influence of how her husband was reacting before and how she reacts to that. And then there's something about how she was acting the moment just before, and there's some constant about her character, and it's similar for the man. And how he does this in practice, he gets a young married couple in, and then he interviews them for maybe 30 minutes, and he measures all kinds of things. So how much they sweat, how angry they get, their body temperature, and afterwards he asked, how did you feel when she said this? And then he somehow puts this all into this model, and actually there's a book about this equation. It's this big, so it's all much more complicated. And then he can do this really good prediction. And what is a bit disappointing though is that it's not that the stable marriages are the happy ones. So there are unstable marriages that are very, or there are happy marriages, no, other way around. So there are marriages that are likely to go on till death do us part, but are very unhappy, but they will never split up because there's nothing better for them, or at least they feel that way. And but some good news predictions he has about this. One of the things he noted is that the influence the husband allows his wife to have, so the more the wife can influence the behavior of the man, the happier the marriage is. And the The psychologist said that this was because women are used to being influenced by men, so they do this more naturally, but it's really important. Then one kind of obvious thing is that you should say 5 times as many positive things as negative things. But one of the nicest things I read is that it's really good if women complain a lot in the beginning of their relationship. And a guy once asked, should we listen, or is it just that they have to do it? And he said it that you should keep your standards high. So if you don't complain in the beginning of a relationship if there's something you don't like, then it will never improve, and then it will go worse and worse and worse, and especially women should complain in the first few months. So if you're still dating, you should start complaining. So I'm still allowed a minute? Yeah? Can I do a minute? Yeah. I wanted to end with a story which has nothing to do with your books, but I like it so much. I collect mathematicians who die in a crazy way. So some people collect people with nice last words. I collect mathematicians who do something crazy and die. So there's one who fell off an Inca pyramid. There's one who didn't dare to go to the bathroom at a conference and then died of urine infection. It's a very sad old story. There's Évariste Galois, which you maybe know because he had some last words. Évariste Galois was a mathematician who died at 20 in a duel. And the night before this duel, he kept writing all his mathematics with lines, I'm never gonna make it, oh my god, I have so little time, I need to go to this duel. And when he died, he said to his brother, please don't cry, I need all the courage I can muster for dying at the age of 20. Which is sad, but nice. But then the nice story is about Abraham Wald. He was working at air base in the Second World War in Britain. And what happened there was that bombers were sent to Germany, they bombed there, they were attacked of course, and then if they weren't shot down they would fly back to England. And then there were statisticians checking where they were hit, and there would be really big reports about the number of holes and where the airplane was damaged. And then they added up where the areas that were most damaged, and then they would enforce them. So the new airplanes coming from the factory would be stronger in those places, and the ones that were being repaired were also getting more metal plates on those weak spots. And this was until Abraham Wald said, well, there's a fault in our math. We are doing it the wrong way. We should look at the places where we never see a hole, because that's the real big spots, weak spots, because we forget that there are planes on the ground in Germany and they're being hit in the places we never see the damage. So we should look at the places where there's no holes, and those are the real weak spots. And that's what they did, and afterwards many more airplanes returned home. And I like this story so much because he did it with a lot of mathematics and formulas, but you can just tell the idea. And why I collect this story for my mathematician who died in a crazy way is because he died in an air crash 2 years later. So thank you very much.
Ionica, can you help me with one more mathematics problem? Because when the book was almost coming out in the US, Fault in Our Stars, you decided to sign all the pre-ordered books.
Yeah.
And you did the mathematics for that. For you.
Well, I was thinking 100,000 signatures, how many hours, and I came that it was 6 weeks full-time work.
Yeah, it was more because what probably would have been if my hand hadn't gotten slower. But so you have to calculate. You have to do sort of a limit calculation, I think, because my hand got slower as I went along, not faster. So it took about well, it was 150,000, so it took about 10 or 11 weeks total. That was really lovely though, and I was reminded when you were talking about Cantor and how he went crazy, which he did. He spent a lot of the second half of his career trying to prove that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare's plays, which is a notorious sign of going crazy. And he tried to use math to prove it, which is even crazier. But it reminded me of a quote from another mathematician after he saw Cantor's proof for that kind of set the way for set theory. He said, no one will ever be able to expel us from this paradise that Cantor has introduced. And that is the level of like excitement and enthusiasm for this revelation that the infinite set of real numbers was different in size from the infinite set of whole numbers. And yeah, so Hazel's wrong about what she says, but Van Houten is right. And I wanted it that way because I wanted to point out that you can kind of come to an incorrect conclusion that brings a measure of comfort that the correct conclusion can't bring. Van Houten. I mean, the correct response to this amazing fact that infinite sets can be of different sizes is to sort of marvel at the universe, and Van Houten's conclusion is to use it as like an axe against this girl who wants nothing more than, you know, for him to care for her. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again. Well, we're almost asking you to ask some questions. I just wanted to ask one small question. I just wanted to say that despite that we talked pretty serious in the beginning, it is a serious book, but it's also a funny book in many ways, and light and hopeful. One of the things that it's just a small question, but why don't you like Dutch hip-hop? Because in the book it says...
I thought we were going to talk more about the scene in the end. I thought we were going to ask you about Dutch.
No, I just want to know, because in the book he prefers Swedish hip-hop.
Yeah, so, well, the reason, yeah, the novelist is a big fan of Swedish hip-hop. I mean, I made it 2 reasons. First off, Swedish hip-hop is really good. I don't want to make value judgments. Dutch hip-hop is good too, but Swedish hip-hop is really, really good. Like, they have a very strong hip-hop scene there, and they have for 20 years. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that I didn't want it to be Dutch hip-hop because I wanted it, the absurdity of it to me is that he's obsessed with hip-hop, which is lyric-driven music in a language he does not speak. And he does presumably speak Dutch, at least enough, you know, to get by in living in exile and being of Dutch descent. But I really like the idea that he was this huge fan of, and then you know, Hazel in that scene says, "Sir, we don't speak Swedish," and then he says, "Who the hell speaks Swedish?" So yeah, I like that he would, you know, in a almost a Cantor-esque way, be obsessed with something that he can't really have any kind of access to.
Yeah. Well, just one more serious question about that scene, since you brought it up.
Yeah, well, I'm really interested by your questions.
There is. In this scene is one of the most beautiful sentences to me in the book, and that is when Hazel is kissing, when they both are kissing, but we see it from the point of view of Hazel. She says, "And for a weird moment, I really liked my body." That is so fantastic. It is fantastic because this girl has this huge, huge, difficult body, and she is dragging it along her life, actually. This whole thing of the distinction between mind and body and so on, well, can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all fine and good to talk about the distinction of mind and body when you can forget that you have a body. But when your body is sick, you become keenly aware that the moment that your body stops working, you won't have a mind. And that there is really no meaningful distinction between mind and body. And one of the difficult things that in my conversations with people who were seriously ill or dying of cancer, one of the things that I came back to over and over again was that your life is circumscribed by the things your body can and cannot do. That's true for us too. Like, we can't fly, right? We can't, like, no matter how well you are or how good a day you're having, you can't, like, jump up and go fly through the air. But we're all okay with that because no one else can fly either. But when you're sick, you're in that same situation where people are doing things that look to you equivalent to flying. You know, people are doing things with their body that seem, that you know are completely impossible for you. And that's very frustrating. And you are also, you don't have the sort of comfort or luxury of being able to ignore your body. You know, if I don't take my medication, like, I might get sick for a day or something, like, but if I'm not gonna die. You know, it's a very different situation when you're seriously ill. And the last thing is that I wanted her to have this moment where she's reminded that we are also reminded that the body, in the same way that water is not just a source of nutrition, it's also a source of a threat. You know, it can feed us or drown us. That the body is not just this terrible thing that should be dismissed or pushed aside, or in the cases of most of us ignored, that bodies can be wonderful and can be life-giving and life-affirming. And I wanted her to have this moment where she, liked having a body and was grateful for it and didn't want to just cut it off. So I'm glad you like that. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any of you who wants to ask a question? Most of you read the book. Wait, I'll bring you the microphone.
Oh,
Sorry.
I can talk aloud. So.
Okay.
Please don't use the microphone. The metaphor of a Christmas tree, because Christmas tree stands for happiness and birth. Why did you use lit up like a Christmas tree?
Yeah, so there's a part in the book where one of the characters is talking about getting a PET scan, and which is where basically your body is flooded with this thing that makes any tumors that you have, denser parts of tissue, light up, literally. Yeah, for that very reason, like to contrast it, contrast birth and death. I mean, a lot of stuff in the book is arguing that things that we imagine dichotomously, imagine as opposites, are not opposites. That, for instance, water is often used as a way to join these ideas that seem opposite, being born and dying, or being fed and drowning. That these things aren't they're on a continuum. They aren't opposites of each other. And so in that moment I wanted him to say something sad, but also to say something that was both sort of clever and evocative of the joy that had been, that had always been such a big part of their lives together. It's almost like kind of a defiance.
And we're also talking about the character that loves metaphors.
He is fond of them, yes. I had to write one who liked metaphors so that I could use them. Yeah. Otherwise, I wanted it not to come across as pretentious or anything. So I felt if I could make him pretentious, it would have made him pretentious.
So what was your favorite one then?
I like that he smokes an unlit cigarette all the time.
Yeah.
But Gus, my Dutch translator, is here, and one of the conversations that Nan and I had about the book was she would. I remember she wrote and she was like, Gus is saying this, and I don't know if he means this literally because it doesn't seem to be correct. And Gus is always using big words that he doesn't really know the meaning of and slightly misuses. He would kind of just is almost saying what he means, but isn't. And I was like that a lot when I was in high school. I was quite fond of my vocabulary, but I didn't know just how to wield it. And so I like that about him too.
What's about the word proverbial?
Proverbial, right? Yeah, he uses the word proverbial a lot when he's not talking about proverbs. Thank you for reminding me.
Translators, by the way, non-blenders, who did an excellent job.
Oh, well, thank you. I wish I could read it. Maybe someday, hopefully.
Nice book.
Where did the book idea came? That never finished book.
Oh yeah, so there's a book that doesn't end inside the book. I came from a few places. I've read a few books that didn't end, and I found it pretty infuriating, and I thought it was a real violation of the contract between writer and reader intentionally to draw out this emotional relationship between all these characters and the reader, and then to deny you any kind of closure. But also, I know many of my readers feel that I do that. And I don't think I do, but they think I do, and they often email me and ask me every day I get emails, many emails now, asking me what happens after the ends of my books, including this book, which I thought I ended as much as I could possibly ever end a book. I was so certain that at least this time no one would be mad at me, and lots of people still are. So I guess if it's not Harry Potter, skip ahead 20 years and tell everybody that everybody got married and has kids and it's all fine. You didn't write it in.
Spoiler there.
No, sorry. if you haven't read Harry Potter at this point, that's your fault. It's not a spoiler though, because the epilogue is nothing like the rest of the series. It's like this insane insertion. Yeah, exactly. Just cut it out if you're a copy of the last book and enjoy. You know, so that was part of it, and then part of it was the relationship that I had with, when I was in a freshman in college, I had a very intense Hazel-like relationship. The relationship that Hazel has with an Imperial Affliction was similar in some ways to the relationship that I had with David Foster Wallace's novel Infinite Jest, which I was really obsessed with and reread over and over again. And when I was a freshman in college, you know, probably read that book 4 or 5 times, even though it's 1,100 pages long. And a lot of the reason why I was rereading it is because that book is famously non-enjoyable at the end. It's a non-spoilery way to say it, I guess. You know, I didn't feel the resolution that I sought. And I knew that he'd done that on purpose, but it didn't matter to me. I wanted that so much, and I think in the end, the reason I wanted that had absolutely nothing to do with the novel, just as the reason I think Hazel wants these answers has nothing to do with the book. I identified very closely with the character whose story wasn't resolved, and I wanted to know if he was okay, because I wanted to know if I was going to be okay, and that sense of he was telling my story, and then he stopped telling it in the middle of the story, and I needed to know if I was going to be okay. And I think Hazel is so interested, one of the reasons, at least the main reason, that Hazel is so interested in the story of an Imperial Affliction is because she needs to know if Anna's mother in the novel is okay after Anna's death, because she desperately needs to know that her mother, that her family can survive her death, and that it won't be this catastrophic, unsurvivable event in the life of her family when she dies. And so she's looking to the book to tell her that. And there are many great things that books can tell us, but that is one that they can't. That's the moment when we have to turn to the real people in our lives and look to them and, you know, talk to them about it. And I think the book, both in the case of Infinite Jest and in the case of an Imperial Affliction, for Hazel, that book becomes the path to understanding the question that she has to ask, and then she can ask the question. But until she can have this intense relationship with the book, she never knows the question that she needs answered. And that's what books, I think, are very good at, is giving us a path into the questions that are most important to us.
I just add that one of the special things also of this book, and fantastic things, is the relationship between Hazel and her parents. Very loving parents. Did you decide that beforehand, that be this kind of parents?
Yeah, I wanted them to be really nice. I figured I'd given her enough problems with that, but I wanted it to be a really loving relationship, because it's still a difficult relationship, you know, like you still, when you're a teenager, no matter how much your parents love you, it's still a little bit annoying. But I wanted her to feel that comfort, because I didn't want her to be afraid that her parents didn't love her, or be afraid that her parents were secretly cruel people. I wanted her to be afraid for them. Because, you know, it's famous to say that most teenagers are not terribly empathetic, you know, that most teenagers don't focus well on others. But, you know, when you're in the situation that she's in, it really turns her outward. And so I wanted it to be obvious from the beginning that she has this, you know, sort of, very early on in the book, she says the only thing crappier than dying of cancer is having a kid who dies of cancer. So I wanted her to be aware of that, like, right from the beginning, so that you know that she really does love her parents, and that they really do love her back, and that there is a healthiness to that relationship.
Maybe last question?
Yeah, I had a question. Because the process took so long to write this book, did you have a few moments that you really wanted to incorporate from the start, or did it all just happen during writing?
Did I have a few moments, like before I started writing, were there things that I
know that I really wanted to put that on it?
Yeah, there definitely were some things that I wanted to include right from the beginning that were really important to me. Even before I started writing the book, I guess, I wanted to write about I knew I wanted to write about the relationship between the parents, between a parent and a child living with illness. And I knew I wanted to, the unlit cigarette, I knew I wanted to, there were a few things that I went into the book with that I wanted to play with, but most of it came out in writing. But when you spend 10 years writing, of course, a lot will come out in writing. So yeah, most of it came out in the storytelling. And I do that usually. I like write a first draft and then I delete almost all of it and then start again, having discovered what I wanted to write about.
My last question is, where do you go from here? After this book is finished, it will be published in many more countries. You might go to some of these countries.
Yeah, maybe, hopefully.
And now?
I mean, this has been very nice, and it's amazing, and I never could have expected a response to the novel like this. I'm very grateful for it, but I think it's quite important that I start working again, and not become a professional person who talks about his book. I don't think that's a good job, but most of the writers I know who have that job aren't very happy with it. And so I want to start writing another story. Maybe one that is a little less, makes me cry a bit less. So perhaps the story about sport. You'll like it, Edward, at least we'll like it.
Please read it.
Thank you so much.